When I came to Grace Church to be the pastor, I was the solo pastor. It was me. And life was simple. We had a couple of men who served as interns, but the elders decided we needed a full-time assistant. And somehow, Jerry Moyer came on to the radar. Don't know how. I knew Jerry's parents, and I'd have to say I wasn't particularly interested in having Jerry come. His parents are absolutely delightful and wonderful missionaries, but they're scatterbrained. And I didn't need another scatterbrained Moyer around. And plus, he wasn't going to stay. He said, I'll come, but you need to know I've been called to the mission field, and so on. Well, he met with the elders and did an interview, and just, for me, blew me away because he was so clear about goals and what he did. But on top of that, he came as a team. Carolyn came with him, who worked alongside, and she's every bit as organized and so on. And so she became our office administrator. Now, that wasn't a problem until the day I walked in and found the pastor kissing the administrative assistant. I think I cleared my throat and said, and I think in an act of defiance, they did it again. Anyway, I learned from Jerry and Carolyn not to be solo, how to work with others. It's difficult to work with others because you've got to disagree and so on. But they were so good for us. And I think as a congregation, they were here 5 years. So I think as a congregation, we would all say, those of you who knew him, how good it was to have them with us. So Jerry and Carolyn, welcome to Grace Church. You are part of our family. That's how it is.
Thank you, everyone. I hope I don't get too emotional. We leave to return to France on Wednesday, and what a wonderful way to end our 7 weeks here. It's been really great to meet with you these last several days and be back as part of the family here. Today, I'd just like to make a quick resume of the last 27 years of our lives, if I can. And just using the example of a term called Walking the Jesus Road. It was actually a book that was written by an Australian missionary, and I really have enjoyed that. Missions is about walking the Jesus road with people worldwide. The missionary gives by telling others about Christ and serving the local community where they live. And the missionary receives. When we moved to France in 1997, we were excited about giving God to others, but we learned we were receiving by walking the Jesus road with fellow French believers. We were there to give French people the gospel, but we were surprised in what we received. We learned that our own understanding of God was enriched by walking the Jesus road with the people in our metropolitan French-speaking church. Danielle, a 74-year-old Catholic background widow who embraces God with childlike faith. Sylvie, who prays with conviction and confidence, believing God answers prayer. Anna, an African immigrant to France, whose childhood is so vastly different to her daughters who were raised in France, and yet allowing them to see whether they live in a country lacking or abounding in resources, walking the Jesus road can change your life. We came to give to the French church, but we received. We first served as church planters outside of Paris, then as director to a team of missionaries serving in 8 church plants in the greater Paris area. In 2018 to May of 2023, we also served as executive director in Australia, recruiting missionaries and helping restructure the mission. Jerry's current role is European Director, while I serve as Global Mobilization Coordinator. We would like to give you a recent example of how we have received by walking the Jesus Road with people from around the world. About 17 weeks ago, we were in Madrid, Spain, visiting our team. We got to meet Dinesh and Susma, who are both from Nepal, with Hindu backgrounds. Dinesh left Nepal to study in Singapore, where he heard about Jesus from a fellow student. He became a believer, and it changed his life. After Dinesh's university studies, he wanted to study the Bible, and he enrolled in a Bible school in India. He returned to Nepal and attended one of the few evangelical churches there. Meanwhile, God had been working in Susma's life when she was healed from ongoing bleeding. After marriage, they sensed God was calling them to move to Spain to work amongst South Asians with Hindu and Muslim backgrounds. Without a mission agency, without a network of financial supporters, they followed God's leading and started 2 churches amongst South Asians living in Madrid. As word spread, South Asians requested they come to Barcelona. So now, each Saturday evening, Dinesh takes the train from Madrid to Barcelona to begin another church. Some may ask, is cross-cultural mission outdated? Is it a colonial idea that is stuck around for too long? Susma and Dinesh are showing it is not. Missions is still relevant and it's still needed. A missionary's job is not to impose their culture, but to live incarnationally, adapting themselves to the host culture. A missionary seeks to be holistic, knowing people have spiritual needs, but also physical and emotional needs. When a local church, like Grace, supports a missionary, their lives and their fellowship gain perspective. Friends, God is building his kingdom, and the gates of hell will not prevail. God challenges each of us to join. He encourages us to take part in what he is doing around the world. And as we walk on this Jesus road, in return, the church, Grace Church, will receive from our brothers and sisters around the world. Merci beaucoup pour votre soutien à nous. Thank you very much for your support of us.
Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10 and 27. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise, as in a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible.
It's good to be here this morning, and thank you for the welcome. Thank you, Pastor Taylor, for the little bit of a history lesson. It was true. He wasn't so sure about me. And so what he didn't realize is that when we were talking about that, he was telling me kind of what they were looking for and sort of how he thought I wouldn't match up with that. And what he didn't realize is that he gave me a very valuable tip, and that is that I knew exactly what the elders were looking for. So when he says I came, laying things out, I had prepared. And it was true. I think I was a bit, Carolyn would tell you that I probably was a bit of a scattered person when it comes, but I came prepared to make myself look extremely organized. And so thank you, Dick, for that. That's why I got in here. So, and it was a good time, the 5 years that we spent here. And it's also great to be here and preach. It was preparing, saying, what am I going to say to people? Many of you I don't know yet. Many of you I remember from back when we were here. And what can we say? And I was looking through a story, and one came to mind about Abraham. We read a little bit from Hebrews about Abraham. But I read a story about Abraham, and it starts in Genesis chapter 11, right when we start to find, the very beginning of the story of Abraham. And it says that Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out for Ur of the Chaldees they set out from Ur to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Now, Abraham touches me a little bit because if you count up the number of generations between Noah and the flood to Abraham, that makes 10 generations. And I was talking to somebody the other day about the Moyers in Pennsylvania. If you go up to Bucks County, you'll find out that we're all over, just crawling with Moyers. We were very prolific, not very adventurous. We all stayed in Bucks County, but very prolific up there. And the first Moyer arrived, for myself, exactly 10 generations ago. So I'm the 10th generation Moyer in Bucks County, well now other parts of the world, but I'm the 10th generation. And Abraham was the 10th generation descendant from Noah, which is something to think about, that Noah was not that far back. My ancestor goes back to 1703, so that's not that terribly long ago. Abraham is looking back at Noah, who is 10 generations before. And Abraham had 3 brothers. There are 3. There's Abraham, of course, but Nahor and Haran, who is the father of Lot. And Haran dies. And so then Terah, their father, decides to go to Canaan. And nothing is said in the Bible really about why Terah decides to do that. Nor does it explain why they didn't get all the way. Why did they stop halfway there? A person could speculate. You could say, well, perhaps it was just because they were living in a place that was very idolatrous, and it was. The place, Ur, was a very idolatrous place. Haran, where they stopped, also worshipped the goddess of the moon. So that it was an idolatrous place. And so perhaps Terah was thinking, I want to make a new step with God, and we're going to leave and go to another country. Perhaps Terah also received a call from God. We don't hear about that, but perhaps he did. Perhaps it was just simply the fact that as a family, they were becoming very wealthy. Abraham's family was, they were not farmers in the sense of raising crops. They raised animals. They raised goats and that sort of thing. And they were becoming very wealthy. You can see that in later on in Genesis, the number of men that Abraham has working for. He actually has a small army working for him. He's able to go to war against a number of towns, all with the servants he has. And so he was a very wealthy man. Perhaps they were just looking for more open space. It doesn't really say. What we do hear is that they go there, Terah dies, and then God comes to Abraham and says, I want you to go now all the way to Canaan. We see that in Genesis chapter 12. The Lord said to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the people of the world will be blessed through you. So what happens in this story here is God is about to enter into a great covenant of grace with Abraham. A little bit later in the story, God is going to come and pronounce a whole bunch of promises to Abraham. And he's going to talk about Abraham becoming a great nation and eventually expound on this idea of how Abraham is going to bless the entire world. But he's about to enter into this covenant of grace with Abraham. But before, he calls Abraham to go. And he says, before he enters into this covenant, Abraham is called to go. He says, I want you to go to a country that you don't know, and I want you to settle there. Along with that comes a promise. The promise that I will bless you, and you will be a blessing to others. You could shorten that. Abraham is going to be blessed to be a blessing. But Abraham is being called to go, and the promise is made to bless, that he's going to be a blessing. And you see this story is what we just read in Hebrews, where it said that by faith Abraham was called to a place that he would later receive as inheritance. He obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. This was not a place that he knew. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, that was his son and grandson, who were heirs with him of the same promise, for he was looking forward to a city whose foundation and with foundations whose architecture and builder was God. So in this story, God is about to enter into a covenant with him. Before that happens, he calls Abraham to go. He gives Abraham the promise, you will be a blessing, you will be blessed and you will be a blessing. And so he calls them to leave their comfort zone, leave his comfort zone, and go to an unknown place where he would live as a stranger. So that was the call that Abraham had on his life. And in that he said, Hebrews tells us that Abraham obeyed because he was looking forward to something that he didn't see yet. He was looking forward to the city that God would build, this people that he would gather together, and that there would be at some point a very firmly founded city of God, a people of God. He was looking forward to that. Now, as I read through those things, I don't know if you noticed, but that sounds an awful lot like a missionary, isn't it? A missionary who is told, go from your country to a land that I will show you. You do not know where you were going. You don't know that country. You're going to go to a new country. You are going to live like a stranger in that country. It'll be a foreign country. But you are doing it because you're looking forward to a city God would build, and it would include all nations and tribes. So when I read this about Abraham, I feel I identify with him not only because he's 10 generations from his ancestor Noah, and I'm from my first ancestor here in this country, but also, and mostly, because I understand that call that he got. Go to a place that you don't know anything about. We went to France not knowing much about France, really. We worked with French people, of course, and then we turned out our colleagues were German, and we didn't know anything about Germans. And so we ended up working in a lot of contexts that we didn't know much about. And we were called there. We were called to live there as foreigners. And I don't know how many thousands and thousands of times people have remarked, oh, I hear you have a little accent. Where are you from? And so we were very kind of happy when we got asked to go to Australia. We thought, okay, finally, at least they speak English there. And of course, the first thing they're asked, oh, I hear a little accent. Where are you from? You're not from here. And so we can never get away from it. We always feel a little bit like we are foreigners in this country. And we go leaving that. And just talking about the sacrifice that's made, growing up with our kids not having close contact with their grandparents all through those years, and all those things, and the sacrifice that grandparents make by letting them go. It said there that Abraham left his family, left his homeland, left, in fact, a brother behind. Later on, by the way, that brother, when they're looking for a wife for Isaac, they come back and find his wife in the household of that brother, no doubt. But they were gone for many, many years. That separation is there. What Abraham does sounds a lot like what a missionary is called to do. So we go now, and since we're talking about generations, 7 generations later, we come to Moses. We also read about Moses in Hebrews. And there, what we said is that by faith, Moses also, when he had grown, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger, and he persevered because he saw him who was invisible. So here again, we're at a story where God is about to enter into a great covenant of law with his people through Moses. So we're at the beginning of another great covenant. And before this covenant takes place, God calls Moses to go, to leave Pharaoh's house and to go towards his people. Later on, to leave go to the desert. But he calls him to go, and he also gives him a promise. I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. It says he was looking ahead to his reward. He knew that there was going to be a reward for him. He knew that he would be blessed if he answered that call to go. So thinking of Moses, he was, you probably know the story, how the Hebrews were being persecuted in Egypt, and how they were, at one point, they were killing the children that were born, or not allowing the children to be born, so they would be stillborn, and that Moses had been hid from the Pharaoh's soldiers, and hid amongst the rushes by the river, and how Pharaoh's daughter had come along and seen this child, recognized that it was one of these Hebrew children, adopted the child, brought the mother in as a nurse, but then the child grew up in the house of Pharaoh. So Moses no doubt grew up knowing nothing but royalty, knowing nothing but the good life in Egypt. And Egypt was one of those societies that was very separated between the rich and the poor. Moses was in the rich. He was in the elite group at the very top. He was part of that. And did Moses know much about his heritage as a Hebrew? I don't know, but I can just imagine this young man growing up, probably now about, I don't know, maybe 18 or 19, but I can just imagine the type, this guy who is kind of chafing at the injustices around. Maybe he was part of a group that was talking about, we really shouldn't do this with the Hebrews. I don't know, but I can just imagine the type, and he decides, you know what, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to be the rebel, and I'm going to go live with the Hebrews. I'm going to go join them. Now, I'm reading a lot, but I just know how young people are. They can be very idealistic. And so they arrive in he arrives in the ghetto of where the Egypt are living, or where the Hebrews are living. And I can sort of imagine how the Hebrews see this rich kid coming from Pharaoh's thing, thinking he's going to be here and live with them. So I think that when Moses actually arrived amongst the Hebrews, it wasn't like he arrived as a long-lost friend. He was definitely an outsider. He was somebody who didn't know the streets. He didn't know what it was like to make bricks with his bare hands. He didn't know any of that. He shows up, and Hebrews is very kind to him and says he chose the disgrace of being with his fellows. But I can just see how that must have gone, and we do know how it went, because in fact at one point he got a little bit jealous, and he actually killed an Egyptian, and he ends up having to flee to the desert. Once again, where he's going to live as a stranger amongst the Midianites. And so all in the story, you see Moses being thrown out from what was comfortable for him and sent into things. So he was called to leave his comfort zone and go into an unknown place where he would live as a stranger, just like Abraham. So he leaves the desert then, and he leads God's people to the land that God would show them. So once again, he does that same thing. He's going to lead the entire people there. So Moses leaves his life of comfort, first to go to Midian, and then to the desert, and finally right up to the borders of the promised land. And he ends up being, yes, blessed, but also being a blessing to the people of God and taking him there. And it says that he was looking forward to a city that God would build. What it actually says is that he saw him who is invisible. So, remarkably, what was motivating Moses through all of this was faith, like Hebrews tells us, faith of what God was going to do, that God was going to build this city, that God was going to create a people, and that this people were going to be God's people, and he was going to join them. He didn't see that yet. He went in faith, knowing that that would be built, much the way a missionary goes into a blank page by faith, dreaming that someday there will be a church there. That's what Moses did. This carries on. We now come down to Jesus, who is, going with generation things, this is a lot longer, 42 generations from Moses down to, from Abraham to Jesus. So good bit of time goes by. And in Philippians chapter 2, look what they say about Jesus. Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing, taking on the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. So once again, God is about to enter into a new covenant with all of humanity through Jesus. But before he does that, Jesus is called to go. John 1, I love the passage of John as the Christmas passage. Even though it doesn't tell the Christmas story, it does talk about Jesus coming. And John 1, verse 9 says, "The true light that gives light to everyone has come into the world." In the sense that Jesus came into the world. And he came with a promise. God the Father made a promise to him. He says, I will bless you and you will be a blessing. So Philippians 2 tells us what that blessing is. Therefore, God elevated him to a place of highest honor and gave him the name above all names, that at the name of Jesus every knee would bow in heaven and on earth and under earth, and every tongue declare Jesus Christ is Lord. That was the blessing that Jesus was going to receive after having gone through the cross, after having gone through the resurrection. He would be raised to the right hand of God and have the name that was above every other name. But he was also going to be a blessing. Let's come back to John 1 and verse 12, where it says, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave them the right to become the children of God." And we know that's the gospel story, is that through Jesus, we can become children of God and become brothers and sisters of Jesus Christ himself. But John also tells us how Jesus left the comforts of heaven to go to a place that he had created, but where he would be received as a stranger. And reading this chapter of John, I'm just really struck, this year especially, by this passage, this verse 10. "He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him." And I just was really struck by the depths of that. The fact that Jesus knew very well the home that he was coming to because he made it. And yet when he came, he was treated like a stranger. Nobody recognized him. And the depths of that, to come back home and not have a single person recognize you, that did not happen to me this morning. I didn't come and look around and say, "Oh, I just remember being here," but nobody recognized me. So many of you came up and remember when we were there. But that's what Jesus is going through. He comes to a land where he lives and acts as a stranger. And so Jesus again repeats this pattern. You see the pattern, the theme that's in all three of these stories. God is about to enter into a covenant with Abraham, with Moses, with the whole world through Jesus. And then at the same time that he's about to do this, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus are all called to go, to leave their comforts and go into an unknown place where they would live strangers. All three of them have that. At the same time, God promises to bless them and to make them a blessing. And all three do this because of faith, because they're looking forward to a city that God will build, a people that God will establish. And for me, this is just really it's an image very much of mission. I call this message Mission Without an S, because we often talk about missions, which is the sum total of things that we might be involved with. We're going to do a mission here, we're going to do a mission there, we're going to have this project here. But there is something mission without an S, which is this idea of in faith of God, going to a place that is uncomfortable for us, knowing that God is going to do something special there. And that's mission. And it's not something that is just a series of projects we have. It's something that you see all through Scripture, this mission of God, the single mission that we join. We join as missionaries, but here you see Abraham, Moses, and Jesus also joining that same idea of mission. And so, drawing on what we talked about, I think there are several things that can be said about mission that are exactly like these three examples that we gave. Mission is built on a covenant that God has made with us. Mission is built on the fact that God comes into us and calls us to a relationship with him. And that's the very first thing, is God coming to me, God coming towards me. It's the first step towards me. And just as I am, with all of my faults, with all of my weaknesses, with all of my failings, God takes a step to me and decides first and foremost that he is going to make the step towards me. So the very first thing is it's God's mission to each and every one of us. God has a mission to love us, and he doesn't leave us alone. And then mission is about leaving a comfort zone and going into the unknown. Now, missionaries live this out in a very dramatic way, in which we actually go to a foreign country and live as foreigners. But that's something that is true of all of us. We are all called then to step into those places that are unknown to us, step into those places that might be uncomfortable to us, and in many cases, live as a stranger in the land that God has called, or in the place that God has called us to. Furthermore, Carolyn made this point a little bit in the report she had. Missions is not something that's old-fashioned, that's outdated. Mission is not the West to the rest, which is often a phrase used, that somehow this mission is a North American, European thing, and we go to all the other countries of the world well, it used to be to civilize them and bring the gospel to them. That's not what it is at all. It is actually a reciprocal blessing. And I think this is the important thing to see. Jesus, or God, over and over again told Abraham, Moses, Jesus, but others as well, that they would be blessed, yes, but they would be blessed to be a blessing. They were going to receive, but out of that, what they received, they were going to give. And like Carolyn said this morning, missions is very much that. You go to some place to give, and when we went to France, I think we went with this idea of, how much we were going to bring to France, people we were going to win to the Lord, going to people who didn't know God, and we were surprised at how much we received when we went there, and how much we received from the people that we were working with and the fellow Christians we had. But I think that's true of a church as well. When a church like Grace Church gets involved in missions, it is a blessing that they are giving. They are sending a blessing, that is true, to some part of the world, and some part of the world is going to be very directly blessed by what you do. But I don't think a church should ever forget what we receive, because missions is about community. Missions is about receiving as well. So what kind of things does a church receive? Well, I think one thing that's very important is perspective. I have been reading some authors and listening to people that say so often we get very alarmed about the state of the church, the decline of people coming. You see statistics about how many people are leaving churches, that the younger generation isn't coming, and we get alarmed by that. And what we forget so often is that is, from our own perspective, that's what we see around us. But there's a whole world out there where the church is doing very well. We get alarmed sometimes about the state of theological questions, or maybe even social questions that are so big in our world today. And if you step out into another country, you realize that those issues are not so important in some of those countries. I mean, they have other issues that they're working with, but they're not the same. And when a church gets involved with churches around the world, I think one of the things they gain is perspective. And they begin to see the things that preoccupy us right now where we are, not necessarily the things that preoccupy everybody. And certainly, one thing you find out is that the church is alive and well. And this story that Carolyn told about Dinesh was just heartwarming to us, to see that who would have thought missionaries from Nepal, who would have thought missionaries from Nepal going to Madrid? I mean, what are they thinking? But then I think, well, what are we thinking going to France? But what are they thinking going to Madrid and to go and make an impact? And it's encouraging to realize that while we're struggling sometimes to find missionaries willing to go from this country, there's other countries that have many people who are willing to go. Different challenges, financial and so forth, but many people willing to go. You gain perspective when you engage in missions. You give a blessing, that's true, but you don't forget you receive. You also are able to encourage one another. I think that's one of the biggest things, is when you have people who come from fields and countries that you partner with, and when those people come back and tell us about the great things that are happening there, or even the small things, but the victories, when you're able to hear the common struggles you have, and you can encourage one another, and you can be encouraged by what's happening around the world. That countries like Korea, who were formerly certainly considered a mission field, are now some of the strongest sending countries in the world. The countries we would have never imagined as being evangelized are much more evangelized than we are. That's encouraging. And it's encouraging to see and gives hope for our countries as well. And of course, there's a common blessing of simply just seeing the lost come to Christ. Now, I don't know of anything that is more precious that when you see somebody who is spiritually dead come back to spiritual life. And to be able to see that, to hear about that. I know in your experience, in my experience, that's not necessarily that we see every day. We see that from time to time. But when we can share what we see, we can receive the blessing of having heard of people coming to Christ. So missions is an act of faith in love for and worship of God. It really is looking forward to what God can do. And when we hear stories of God acting, it encourages our faith to imagine, what can he do right around us? How can he complete his mission around us? So coming back to that definition, out of the text we have, missions is really about crossing a significant boundary to take the gospel. I know sometimes we wrestle with that definition. What is missions? You don't want to say that everything is mission, yet in some sense it is. You want to say there is something special about the missionary as opposed to just what a local church might do. I'm not so sure that there's a big difference, but I would say that we do want to be precise about what mission is. I think mission is, as opposed to what simply a church does naturally in its own context, I think the mission of the church is when a person or a church or a group within a church cross a significant boundary. That's the main thing to me. Now, sometimes those are national boundaries. Sometimes they're cultural boundaries. Sometimes they're racial, social, economic. There's all kinds of boundaries that will separate people. And so there'll be people that are around us who, quite honestly, will just not be touched by the church unless that church makes a significant effort to go towards them. And so missions is crossing some sort of significant boundary to take the gospel within reach of lost people. It certainly involves, on a personal level, leaving where you feel comfortable and going into an area where you are going to feel like a stranger. And once again, I just think that this is an important aspect of missions. So often when we want to reach out to lost people, we want to bring them to a place where we feel comfortable. So we have our concerts, we have our conferences, we do our programs where we feel comfortable, and then we kind of wonder why people don't come. It's because they don't feel comfortable coming to us. And one of the things we've often said first as the France field and now in the Europe area, just constantly remind ourselves, if in sharing the gospel somebody should be uncomfortable, that person should be me, not the person I'm trying to take the gospel to. So what does that mean? That means I need to cross the bridge. I need to cross the log over the river, that part that is scary and uncomfortable. I need to be one willing to go step out, just like Abraham did, just like Moses did, just like Jesus did, willing to leave my comfort zone and go to a place God is calling me. Now, that might be across the world, or it might be right across the street. I remember having a conversation with some friends, and they had said, oh, this Indian couple just moved in. They're Indian or Pakistani, I don't really know. But they said they moved in, and I've been thinking so much about going over and seeing them and just being friendly, but I'm terrified of it. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't know if if we have them for a meal, can we do that? Can we eat together? And you could just see the person really wanted to reach out, but was kind of terrified to take that step for fear of doing something wrong. Well, that's exactly the place that God puts us in. He makes a great promise. He wants to do something with us, but we have to take that step. We can't expect people to come to us. We need to be the ones willing to be uncomfortable. Missions is unsafe. It is about stepping out of our comfort zone and into someone else's space. It's about building community with people who are different from us and without first requiring that they become like us. And Carolyn, the word incarnational, that's exactly what it is. It's us coming into their space and adapting ourselves to their space. I think sometimes we don't go towards lost people because we have this real panic about how can I convince them of the gospel. And we want to create this controlled space where we're sure that a clear presentation of the gospel will be given. The truth is that our faith is very contagious. We have a lot in common with our non-believing friends and neighbors. We have a lot in common with them. We have the same kind of issues, the same kind of fears, the same kind of difficulties, the same kind of struggles. And we have each tried to find answers and found ways of dealing with those. And we know how our way works for us. And you'd be surprised how contagious our faith is and what Jesus means to us and how much people admire that, even if they don't believe it, might admire the way that we do that. And really, the biggest challenge is not so much the sharing of the gospel. That's contagious. That'll happen. Just because people will observe our life and how we deal with things. The courageous step is simply going towards somebody and being willing to step into out of my comfort zone and into somebody else's comfort zone. So just to conclude for today, 4 things I'd like to leave with you. The first is just this. If he has not already done it, God is about to make a covenant with you. If you are here and you are not a believer, that is to say you are not sure about where you stand in the relationship with God, you're not sure whether God would call you his child, just know God is pursuing you. Just like he did Abraham, just like he did Moses, he wants to have a covenant relationship with you. He wants to make you his child. He wants to adopt you as his own. That's the promise that's there. And he has made the promise. He's made that promise to all. So that's the first thing, is if you're here and you're not sure about that relationship you have with God, you might not be sure. God's sure. He wants you. And he's giving you the opportunity to feel that and to open your heart to that and be his child. One thing you should know, though, is that if you take that covenant and you become his child, there is with it a call to go. A call to and that's my second thing, is to have you look for the unknown around you. And I really think we should all, this is something that really, for all of us who believe and are children of God, it's to look for that unknown, that uncomfortable place around us where God might be calling us to take a step. It doesn't have to be to another country. It might be. And if you feel it might be to another country, I have some ideas for you. So feel free to talk to me about that. But it might just be across the street. But I think we really should look for the unknown around us. Third thing is leaving our agenda. Sometimes we get really uptight about what it is we're supposed to do when we make friends with people. And we come across to people as somebody who, we have some sort of agenda. We're trying to convert people. We're trying to evangelize them. We're trying to get them to come to our church. And I think we really need to leave our agenda behind. Why? Because God has already made the promise. I will bless you, and I'll make you a blessing. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about being the blessing. God will take care of that. You are a blessing because you're his child. And the last thing is, I would feel great if I heard that because of this, one of you or several of you or all of you maybe made a step of friendship towards somebody that you know around you who is really outside of your comfort zone. There are people when you go to talk to them, you are going to feel a bit like a stranger. You're not going to know exactly what you're supposed to say, what you're supposed to do. But you made that step of friendship, and you made the effort of building that bridge towards somebody who is really different from you. And you haven't required them to become like you before you did that. But you've made the step of friendship towards them. All of this is really what mission is. And I really do believe that every one of us are called to that. Some in a more dramatic way, by going far, but every one of us is called in a very dramatic way by going to people who I think many times are just waiting to have conversations with somebody like you and understand what it is that makes you tick. Let's pray together. Our kind Heavenly Father, I do thank you that you came first to us. The mission is first and foremost yours, and you took this step of coming towards us. In fact, when you came in the form of Jesus, when you came as the Son to us, we didn't even notice that you were with us. We didn't recognize you. You came as a stranger, and you made that first step. And look what happens. You have tens of hundreds of thousands, millions of children around the world now who know you because you were willing to take that step. And Father, may each one of us be willing to take the same step towards those who are different from us, who are uncomfortable this week. I thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.